Hi, everyone. My name is Kelvin Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Thank you so very much for joining us for this Cybersecurity My Business presentation. Of course, today we're going to be talking about the cloud. What is the cloud, and how should small and medium-sized businesses be thinking about the cloud? How do you evaluate different cloud storage applications? So we're very fortunate to have Bill, Malik, and Robbie O'Sullivan from Trend Micro with us today. And of course, I want to thank Trend Micro as our signature sponsor for this event. What a great company and great organization. I also want to thank our affiliate sponsor, General. All great partners. Finally, before I turn it over to Robbie and Bill, the stars of the show, I want to thank our wonderful partner, Mitchell Chang, for his extraordinary support of Cybersecurity My Business, and certainly the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Mitchell sits on our executive board of directors. So thank you, Mitchell. With that, I'm going to get out of the way. Bill, Robbie, I'm going to turn it over to you right now. Gentlemen, I'll see you at the tail end of your presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Rob. This is Bill Malik. I've been with Trend on the next chart, my bio, since 2017, a little over 3 years. And I've been in IT for quite a while. I started out as a COBOL programmer in payroll applications in Boston in the late 70s. Went to IBM in the 80s and wrote code for the mainframe, MVS, now called ZIOS. In the 90s, I was with Gartner. I founded their information security strategy service and also ran the middleware and application integration service. I became CTO of a startup in 2002 called Waveset in the identity management space. And since leaving that, I've basically spent up until my time with Trend as an enterprise architect and independent consultant. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is talk about the context for cloud security. And I'm going to begin with this lesson about the importance of process. This is a fable about two watchmakers. They both make beautiful watches. In fact, they both make the same watch. One of them, Tempest, puts the 1,000 parts together to build a watch. The other one, Hora, has broken down the process. He doesn't build a watch until he has 10 complete assemblies. And he doesn't complete the 10 assemblies until each assembly has its 10 sub-assemblies done. And each one of those sub-assemblies takes 10 pieces. Now here's the trick. Because the watches are so popular, they get calls. And when they get called, they put down their work in progress and answer the phone. So what does that mean? That means that whenever Hora gets a call, he puts down what he's working on and it reverts to its original state. So if he's in the middle of a sub-assembly, it'll fall back into its 10 constituent parts. What that means is that at any point in time, a call to Hora is at worst going to set him back about 5 pieces. But a call to Tempest, even if he's got 998 parts done, if he answers that phone and puts it down, it'll fall apart. The result is Tempest goes broke and Hora has a booming business because they've split the work up. Same parts, same design. The different work process means you can get it done easily and on time and reliably by breaking it into components and doing it in steps. If you try to do the whole thing at once, it will fall apart. So having said that, let me just tell you that cloud isn't a panacea. And on the next chart, we talk about the fact that regardless of what kind of cloud technology you use, there's always going to be something that you are still responsible for. You can't get rid of the whole thing. And I have a personal anecdote I'm going to share. I went to my doctor a few months ago, and he told me that, Bill, you really need to lose weight. And I said, okay, so how do I do that? And he said, well, first, eat less. And second, exercise more. And I thought about it, and I said, that sounds reasonable. And having been an enterprise architect, I then performed a survey of core competences because I want to do those things that are in fact my core competence, and those things that are not in my core competence, I'm going to outsource. And I realized that Eating less is a core competence, and I can work on that personally. But exercising more, that's really not a core competence, and so I decided to outsource that. I send a check for $72 to my health club every month, and I haven't lost one darn pound. Those guys aren't doing their job. Well, the reality is you cannot outsource the responsibility for the tasks that you have to perform. Even if you're doing business process as a service, you still have to make sure you understand those service levels are being met. You still have to know how well things are being done. And the more deep you get into it, to the point of infrastructure as a service, you have to do everything. You have to build the workload. You have to provide the content. You have to provide as much management. And basically, the only thing you're not doing is physically installing the hardware. So having gone with that, let us now take a look at some more details inside what's going on in this world of cloud. The next chart just simply reminds us of the spectacular growth and complexity. Once upon a time, there were physical servers. With the overcomplexity of Multics, which I actually worked a little bit on when I was an undergraduate in college, the reaction was in the form of Unix, and Unix begat Linux. Virtualization has been around also a long time. I actually worked on a virtual machine as a freshman in 1969. We've gone to virtual servers, we've deployed virtual desktops, and now we're in the world of cloud, and cloud itself has bifurcated into various kinds of containers, and even we have serverless environments. These things don't displace one another. They're all add-ons. There's always going to be a physical server somewhere that you are still responsible for. What does that mean for cloud security? Well, to take a metaphor from a popular movie of not too many years ago, this has become a perfect storm. We have a lot of stuff going on. On the next chart, you'll see the exploding set of cloud infrastructure services. There are many, many things you can do. DevOps is increasing the velocity, I'm on the next chart now, of application delivery and deployment. The CD/CI cycle is sped up vastly. I have to give a bit of a nod to different development methodologies. Waterfall was never as bad as it's characterized. There was always feedback. There were always testers who go back to developers and said, what did you mean by this? There were always developers who went back to designers and said, what did you mean by this? There were always designers who went back to architects and said, what the heck did you mean by this? So there was feedback. It just wasn't a formalized part of the simplified descriptions that were shown. There are new vectors for attacks. There are more demanding requirements for compliance. And in fact, we can go into more detail on the next chart, which answers the question, why do I need additional security in the cloud? Well, it's because the threats are getting more sophisticated. There are more kinds of networks. There are attacks coming in over non-traditional vehicles, your robots, your connected cars, your home devices, your security cameras. These are now connected to IP networks and can be bearers of traffic. And as far as compliance, this may look like a tired old list we've seen for years and years, but think about where we are right now. If you're running any kind of an enterprise that deals with the public, or you have your own employees coming into a facility, you might want to take their temperature to see if they're okay. And once you take somebody's temperature and write it down, you've just created some HIPAA-governed information because that's personal health data. So you want to make sure that your compliance regulations are in place regardless of the platform. And this is another one of those states where, well, because the cloud service provider says that their platform is designed to meet HIPAA requirements or designed to be PCI DSS compliant, does not mean that you don't have to check it yourself. You always have to check it yourself. So let's take a look at some of these security challenges we have in the cloud. The first one is visibility. When you have multiple cloud vendors, and we all do, what can you really say about the aggregate? What can you say about what data is likely to reside in any or all of them? With regard to agility, we used to think of procurement as either buy it or build it. But now, to an increasing degree, the third choice is rent it. And how do you govern and comply with appropriate purchasing mechanisms when you're renting stuff? when you're using stuff perhaps only for a few moments, perhaps only for the lifetime of a particular transaction. You get a subscription to a service, and now you've got some cloud storage out there. That may be a path for data exfiltration or for the installation of malicious or unknown code into your environments. As we said before, DevOps has picked up the pace of things. I pronounce it that way because the sec is too often silent. And you have to rethink what's going on with regard to purchasing and the governance of that. Remember, so much of these activities aren't even within the purvey of the classical IT organization. How does your purchasing organization evaluate a transaction for web services or for cloud services? So on the next chart, what do we do about it? Well, the traditional triad talks about making sure that people know the right thing to do, and that comes down to awareness and training, that we have the right processes in place, and don't forget that watchmaker. Make your processes well-defined. Make your processes resilient. Make your processes include not just finding a problem, but fixing the problem and cleaning up afterwards. You don't want to go back to the way things were just before the attack, because the way things were just before the attack was when you were vulnerable and got attacked. You have to be able to incorporate learnings, lessons learned, first cause analysis before you stand up your improved system as part of your remediation process. And finally, 2 points I'd want to make on tools. The first is, and I'm so sorry to have to say this, keep your software up to date. Install current malware signatures. Make sure you've applied updates. I know that is a complex task. The Apache Struts vulnerability was avoided only by going to the next release of Apache Struts. Unfortunately, migrating to the next release of Apache Struts is a much, much more complex process than installing a new AV signature or installing a regular update to your Windows OS. In the case of Apache Struts, you actually had to rewrite applications. You had to use different application interfaces. There were different parameterizations required on the way. And the other point I want to ask you is to know what you're running on. Even if you've outsourced it, you still need to know something about the environment, what applications you have in place. Again, to take the old example of Apache Struts, the organization that had that terrible breach did not know, they could not verify that they even had the product installed. So this is a plea for a software asset management discipline. Now, in the next two charts, I'm going to take a look a little bit deeper into process. The first one, this is COBIT. Those of you who are familiar with ISACA will certainly know about this, Control Objectives for Business and Related Information Technology. This was developed by IT auditors back in the 1990s, and it describes about 35 key processes that you need to have to run a data center. That was what was in mind when it was built. But in fact, this describes the 35 key processes you have to run in place to manage information technology, regardless of who owns it. So this is a good place to start if you want to crisp up your processes. So you know who's responsible for what they are responsible for, how it's being done, where the outputs go, where the inputs come from, and most importantly, how you can verify that it was done correctly. All good things to have in the course of managing your assets, cloud-based or otherwise. The next diagram I want to give you is a little more complex, and this is a chart from engineering, chemical engineering and mechanical engineering. It's called process hazard analysis. On the right-hand side, you'll see the familiar DevOps loop. You design something, you implement it, you put it in place, you take a look at how well it works, you make changes, you enhance your program. Well, translate this to physical processes. You're building a petrochemical refinery. Now, the circle on the left, we haven't got there yet in IT. That is a continuous process of assessing things that may introduce new problems. When a new asset comes in place, you've got to find out about it. You've got to decide how to assess it, prioritize those, and then see the impact on your security process that that new asset brings to you. By using this, what they're now calling cyber process hazard analysis discipline from engineering, we can take one of the great lessons from the engineering fields and apply it to what we're doing in software and certainly in cloud management. Now, that is the conclusion of my remarks. And now what I'd like to do is turn it over to my colleague, Rai, who is going to talk about securing data in the cloud.
Thanks very much, Bill. That's great. I'm delighted to be able to present today to you guys, and we'll go through a couple of slides and hopefully give you some of my experience of securing data in the cloud and our interactions within the cloud. Just a small bit about me on the next slide. I'm 6 years in Trend Micro. I'm an IT program manager responsible for our global training platform that's used internally and externally. I've also been the European IT manager for our European offices with 17 offices and nearly 700 staff. And I started in Trend as a cloud solution architect. And overall, I've been about 17 years in IT. So not quite the wisdom and experience of Bill, but I'm getting there. On the next slide, just a small agenda. To go back on what Bill said about a framework or compliance and process, I'll give you a small bit of a background on how we approach our security. And then I want to talk about a couple of key things about multi-factor authentication and protecting workloads in the cloud and users in the cloud too as well. So if we go to our approach, very similar to on the next slide, very similar to what Bill was saying about process and people and technology. We approach it the exact same way. We have policy frameworks from IT and InfoSec and various compliance rules we need to adhere to, say in Europe, GDPR for personal data as well, and that's very important. We then use our technology to apply those policies or manage those policies and ensure that everything is running smoothly. And then finally, education is a key part because our users are possibly one of the weakest links in the whole chain. You know, we need people to be aware, to be security aware, and to be skeptical. You know, in terms of phishing emails and other types of problems, or if they see something, they should say something to our InfoSec group to protect us as well. On the next slide, I'll just go through our kind of policy and framework. So at the center of what we do, it's all about our brand. You know, trust in Trend Micro is critical as a security provider, so that's the most important asset that we protect. And that then incorporates all of our data, our user data, our product data, our intellectual property, all that kind of stuff. But wrapped around this, we'll have this layered defense or a framework that you'll see. So if Jennifer, if you want to just build out the whole slide, just click, yeah, great. So these are the different layers that we have within the system. So you've got your data security with encryption, access control, then you've got your application security, which also includes encryption for data in transit or interacting with applications. Then you've got to think about your endpoints, like your users or in the network, like firewalls and that kind of stuff too as well. And at the outer end, in a typical organization, you have your network security with your firewalls and intrusion detection or intrusion prevention type systems. So there's several layers that is called defense in depth. So by using those multiple layers, there's less chance of an attacker getting in to access your data or cause disruption to your business. So we go to the next animation. Yeah. So then managing all of that then, as I said, we have our policy management, security policies, application patching, as Bill mentioned, is absolutely critical. I shouldn't say this, but the Australia did a study and they said that if everyone patched their machines and kept them all up to date, you probably would minimize the possibility of an attack. But in practical terms from IT, keeping everything up to date and patched can be difficult if you're trying to maintain services or you've got some old machines too as well. So it is a challenge. and that's where security software can come in. On the next animation, please. And then finally, we manage all of this through our operations. We have a security operations center running 24/7. We have a lot of centralized administration for all our cloud, and we have a dedicated incident response team if something does happen. And our users, we have an internal process called 911, which is where we can report anything suspicious in our emails or unusual on our laptops to our InfoSec. So that's how the whole piece fits together for us within Trend Micro from an IT perspective. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the kind of traditional world or pre-COVID, the enterprise or the business was a fortress. You had your firewalls or your network security, and nothing could get in. And if it was attacked, they'd be in the center, and you could possibly detect it or do something about it. So go next. We just have our imposters, our attackers in here. But now, post-COVID, with everyone working from home, it's completely changed the landscape for protecting users and individuals. Everything is moving towards cloud, all the cloud services that are being accessed to as well. But people are now doing this from home. So they no longer have all of the advanced security that might be in office with firewalls and other technologies that are protecting everything like backups and that kind of stuff. Now you have a worker or someone at home with just their home router, and that could be vulnerable. You've no control over that kind of technology. You can't make sure that the router has been patched and updated to make sure it's secure. It's very hard to manage the settings on that to keep it secure. So you're down to making sure that the endpoint is as secure as you can, because on that laptop, you will have potentially company data. But not only that, through that laptop, the employee is accessing cloud services and cloud data. So if an attacker was to get in and get access, they can get credentials, or they can use the laptop and then gain access to your critical company data. So if we go to the next slides. So it's very important to think about what data services you're actually using. And this is a real challenge for kind of corporate IT as well. But you may recognize some of these icons here, like Slack, Trello, Dropbox, Google Drive, or you may have heard of Amazon S3 buckets for storing data. There's a whole myriad of different, and of course there's also email. For a lot of people, that's their filing cabinet, or that's their database. So email is actually another source of critical data. With all of these cloud services, you could have people signing up to services without consulting IT or haven't done due diligence. And from an IT organization or security organization, it's very hard to control that and make sure that there's proper data retention policies being in place. Is the data suitably restricted so that only the right people can access it? Are the correct password policies being applied to as well? Or is someone just using, say, Trend Micro 123, or your first name and your date of birth? So in Trend, we actually use ADFS to protect all of our cloud services. And we also use Duo for multi-factor authentication too as well, to add an additional layer of security. Within Trend, we use all these services too as well. Within my team, we've moved towards containers and serverless computing too as well. So it's very important, if you are using containers, that there's vulnerability scanning going in place, and this is available through Harbor, which is a tool that we use. There's also tools that we have from Trend Micro for application protection that can also secure your code too as well. And then there's also workload protection, which can scan workloads you have either on your data center or also in AWS, Azure, or Google. In terms of compliance, as Bill mentioned, there's lots of tools out there to be able to check and give you that visibility that you need to see how things are running. So AWS CloudTrail is a fantastic service, and also Trend Micro has a solution called One Conformity, which will also audit and inspect all of your cloud workloads and give you advice on any weaknesses or any vulnerabilities. Just checking, can everyone hear me okay?
Robbie, yeah, you're coming in loud and clear on my end.
Okay. So yeah, okay, sorry about that. So if you, Jennifer, if you just click through to the next animation, and it should pop up. And one more, I think. Oh no, sorry. Just, yeah, okay. So back one there. Yeah, sorry, thank you. So I'll just briefly talk about this diagram. It's kind of how we set are set up within Trend Micro. But the one thing I wanted to focus on was in the middle, we have the Cloud One workload security that we use to protect and give a single pane of glass visibility to all of our workloads. So we use, for corporate technology, we use Azure and AWS. But for our R&D team, they're using all of the cloud services like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud too as well. But this solution can also provide visibility to our internal workloads too as well, where we have some physical servers, a lot of virtual servers, and we've also adopted containers too as well. But this solution gives us that visibility that Bill was talking about earlier on, that we can see all of our workloads, and we can apply security policies to all of our workloads from this one central location. And again, this doesn't have to be for an enterprise customer. You know, this is a cloud service, so based on your consumption. So even if you only have a handful of servers in the cloud, you can also use this solution to give you protection. So on the next slide, there's just a couple of images, just examples of that compliance. So we get regular emails to us if we spin up machines that are not compliant. You go to the next one again, Jennifer, please. And again, we have this compliance as well if there's ports that are open, or if there's Amazon S3 buckets that have not had the appropriate policies applied. So all of this for us in Trend Micro is automated, and these are just some examples that my team would get, because we're developing new services within the training platform and experimenting. So sometimes we don't always apply the correct policy when we're testing, and then we get reminders to make sure that everything is as secure as it can be. So the last thing I wanted to talk about then was about the user and the challenges we have with users and around education. As I said, potentially this is one of the weakest links in an organization, because you have to trust the users to do the right thing, especially when it comes to phishing emails and also how they access and store critical company data. One of the challenges we had with, the traditional IT model was that our endpoint solution was on-premise. So it worked on the assumption that everyone was in the office, they were connected to our corporate network, and they would get the updates as required. The reality of that was that a lot of our people are on the road. There's a lot of sales teams traveling to customers, or people working from home, or not in the office, or on holidays. So enabling those updates for security updates, but also for patching Windows and Apple systems, was a real challenge. So what we've done to address that is move to our Apex One SaaS solution, and that has given us increased access to make sure that no matter where our users are, as long as they have internet access, they will be able to get security updates. And we in turn can get telemetry or details back if there's anything suspicious going on with their machine. The same thing for our operating system updates too as well. That's also being delivered via cloud. So now with the whole COVID thing and people working from home, we do not have an exposure here because we can make sure that our endpoints are all up to date. The next part we look at too as well is controlling or blocking unwanted applications. So this is a screenshot here for our solution where you can block applications like TeamViewer and other things like that. So if you don't want to use certain applications, so TeamViewer can be a risk if it's not secured properly, that attackers can often social engineer on phone calls and get people to install TeamViewer on the machine and then give remote access to the attacker. So we choose to block any unapproved applications within our organization as well. So moving on to phishing and credential theft, it's a huge attack vector. It's as it starts here, 1 in every 99 emails is potentially a phishing attack email, and Office 365, being a huge popular email platform, is the most common, and attackers have gotten extremely sophisticated in being able to duplicate and mimic the Office 365 login page. So if you're in a hurry or if there's a last-minute request or something on a Friday evening, or you're kind of rushing out the door to do something and an email comes in, sometimes you might not always check because it looks okay, it looks right, but in actual fact, it's been a fake website and people will be able to capture your credentials. And that's where things like multi-factor authentication come into place, where you have an additional layer of security rather than just the email or the username and password. One example here from ourselves is that a local recruitment company got attacked, and they were sending phishing emails from that recruitment agency's account. The sneaky thing here with that is this wasn't a spam email address, it wasn't a bad email address, it was a genuine small business. And they were then sending emails trying to trick anyone in the contacts. So by using that person's email account, they could see potential targets of who that person was interacting with. And by sending them an email with a link or an attachment, they're able to trick people into thinking that this is from a trusted source and therefore it must be a genuine document. So that level of attack is extremely sophisticated, and you really need to be on the ball to spot anything unusual with that. We go to the next slide. So as I said, in part of our triangle or triad, education or people is a big part of this. So internally, what we do, we have a lot of security awareness campaigns, and we also do a lot of education around phishing emails and show examples of emails and keep up to date with the different types of threats that we see being sent to try and trick people up. So what we do is we simulate a lot of the attacks ourselves internally, and we're looking at, Amazon gift vouchers being sent, or Facebook login update, or all of those kind of things that people would think are normal. So we actually test our own employees and mirror those solutions, and then we actually have a score there, and we see how vulnerable we are, or are there certain people in the organization who need further training to help. And this is actually a tool that is available to anyone for free. If we go to the next slide. So again, I'm not a salesperson. I'm definitely an IT person. I know I've talked a lot about trend products, but that's because I use them. It's my everyday work that I do. But there is another solution that we have, and it's available to you for free, and it's called Phish Insight. And this allows you to create simulated phishing campaigns that can test your users and see, are any of them likely to enter in their credentials and allow access. And that is a wrap from me. I know I've gone through all of that quite quickly. And I guess that gives a bit more time for any questions. So I'd be delighted to answer any questions from my own personal experience within Trend, or any questions about other cloud providers, or I'm happy to share anything that we use ourselves within my team. So more than happy to.
Robbie, Bill, I can't thank you enough. Super informative, and I actually got a comment from an attendee that says it's very accessible. So you made what could have been a complicated issue, and both of you really talked about it in a very accessible way. So thank you very much. Also, I couldn't help but see that from your approach, you talked about policy framework, education, and technology. 2 of those 3 are decidedly not very technical, right? And so it seems like, the human being still has a huge part to play in this. So really appreciate that. With that, we do have a few questions. First one here, and Robbie, Bill, I'll just throw it over to you and you decide which one is going to take it. What are the internal controls for the cloud computing environment?
I'll give that to you, Robbie.
In the internal, I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. The kinds of controls that any cloud provider has include things like what's the capacity, what's the limit on growth, what's the expected duration. But probably one of the most important ones is who has access to that resource. Remember that when a cloud environment is created, it is completely secure and nobody has access to it. So when you bring a cloud environment into the development process and then into production, only people who've been granted access will be able to see it. Now, if you balance that fact against the fact that most of the cloud security problems have to do with inappropriate access, then the conclusion I draw is you need to make sure that when you grant access to a group, that you know who's in the group. And in fact, there is a tool, Rob, you mentioned, called Cloud Conformity, that will help you figure out if the many specific settings, there are hundreds that go around a cloud storage capability, are in fact consistent. They won't tell you if you've made a mistake, but they will tell you if you seem to have a rule here that's highly restrictive, but you've got another rule over there that essentially overrides it, and it'll map that inconsistency, which you then have to check out on your own. Maybe that partially answers the question.
Bill, thank you very much. In fact, that's the great thing about having this wonderful group of attendees, because you have some folks out there who know a little something too. TJ Cruz says, I think the question is more about compliance controls and which ones are inherited from the CSP versus ones that are the responsibility of the user MSP. So, we get a little bit more in that. To tell you what, let's go on to the next question here. This is actually from a dear friend of mine, Mimi Carter from Proof. She says, several of my clients who are international, both corporate and government, use Office 365. What are the 3 main to-dos we should ensure they engage in to protect their information? The biggest concern they have is communicating with vendors.
I think the number one thing is enabling multi-factor authentication, so that accounts or email don't get compromised. From a Trend perspective, our CISO mentioned this is one of the best investments they've ever made a long time ago. So previously in Trend, we used to use RSA, and those keys and tokens, people would lose them or get difficult. So as I mentioned, we've swapped to a solution called Duo, which then appears on my phone whenever I log into any service that we have, and from a trend perspective, any cloud or public service is mandated, and this goes back to one of the control questions, is mandated by InfoSec to have this two-factor enabled. And from a cloud perspective, and we've set this up ourselves on one of our demo systems, it's very easy to integrate. So I mentioned earlier on the slide, we have ADFS to allow the cloud authentication, and then ADFS is tied into Duo to provide the multi-factor element. There's a famous case where Jack Dorsey from Twitter had his account hacked because they were able to swap out his SIM or steal his mobile number and reset his account. With multi-factor things like Duo or Google Authenticator, it's much more difficult to do that, and someone has to steal your phone and have your fingerprint or your PIN on the phone to be able to do that. So it makes it much more difficult. And from a trend perspective, the number of compromises or attacks on our systems dramatically reduced once we enable two-factor authentication. So we've been using systems like that for years. Other solutions then as well, we have a solution called Cloud App Security. So that will again scan emails. Microsoft has their own solution too as well. We would say ours is better, or there's actually things that the Microsoft solutions don't catch, and you can actually use them in conjunction and have a second or a third layer on top of the Microsoft layer to catch anything that that the Microsoft solutions haven't done that. And there is a case study available on our website. This isn't just marketing spiel. So I think, back to my point about the layers, the more layers you have, the better the chance of catching something, you know, like a business email compromise type fraud. We have things like AI for writing style analysis. So people in their organizations, like the CFO or CIO or CEO, you know, their email writing has been analyzed, and any emails that come in that don't match that will be flagged as potentially fraudulent. So if there's a fake email asking from our CEO, Eva, asking our CFO, Mahindra, to transfer $1 million to some bank account, you know, the way it's expressed, or that type of language, is not the way she would say that. And our systems are able then to potentially flag that. So there's fascinating stuff available.
Wow.
The last point then, just in terms of the interaction with vendors and security, you can also encrypt or sign your emails too as well. Before, this would have been a complicated process, but within Trend, we're now starting to use that with Office 365, where our emails are tagged, where you can specify that this email can only be read by people inside our organization, or it can be printed, so that there's a whole variance of controls that are available now through Office 365 to enhance the security and protect your data.
Robbie, thank you very much. Mimi, you asked for 3. Robbie gave you a list there of things which we at the National Cybersecurity Alliance totally will certainly sign on to that, particularly the multi-factor authentication, Robbie. That seems to be one of the more accessible things for people to do right away. But encryption, training, patching, you mentioned earlier. If we only get people to patch, I think we could go a long way to helping people out. So thank you very much for that, Robbie. Hey, we got a few more questions here. The questions are actually coming in. Question 3 here. What are the cloud environments? Which cloud environment is more secure? Private, community, public, or hybrid?
Well, I'll take a simple stab at that, and then I'll let Robbie correct me. It entirely depends on what kind of controls you put in place. There's no reason that a public cloud shouldn't be secure. I mean, there are, you know, some very, very complex, obtuse attacks. Was recently a notice sent around just in the last day or two that you know, foreign governments are exploiting a vulnerability in VMware to attack virtual machines, and that would apply whether it's a VM running in a cloud or VM running on your own system. But yeah, you can protect any box. I mean, theoretically, if your enterprise is well protected, then the private cloud, which is entirely within the enterprise, is well connected. But that kind of edges off into the philosophy of the perimeter, which I think most security professionals these days recognize as being, an obsolete and early error in thinking about information security.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Robbie, anything to add?
I would agree with that sentiment, and I would also point back to some of Bill's original slides in terms of responsibility for what you control. Ultimately, if you have a server that's not plugged into anything, no network, that is the most secure. Nothing can get to that unless someone physically breaks into it, but then that's difficult to work with, and only some military organizations will go to that level. So it all comes down to being aware of what service you're signing up to and what controls are available from the vendor in terms of guaranteeing security, like encryption, or that their employees can't access your data. It's all encrypted, so only you can access your data if you log in. To having your own internal controls. So, for example, any cloud vendor that we engage with in Trend Micro, there's a whole security checklist from InfoSec to ask those questions about where is the data being stored, how is it being processed. For certainly in Europe with GDPR, like data sovereignty is becoming increasingly important. There's a whole bunch of rules and regulations globally coming in different countries, in America, in Asia too as well, and controlling that data, and the whole social media thing and fake news, the accuracy of data is becoming increasingly important, and people are becoming very, very aware of those problems, and they expect a high level of compliance.
Hey, thanks a lot, Robbie, for that. Bill, I think I have one specifically for you about VPNs. How much protection is offered if employees use a VPN while on their computers while working? Well, it says from home, but I'll just modify it a bit and say working remotely.
Well, the first thing you need to know is that a VPN creates an encrypted link between your PC and wherever the VPN server physically resides. So if you use, as I do, a VPN to connect from my home office to the Trend Micro server, which happens to be located on the West Coast, then any traffic that I send to websites behind that server will be part of that encrypted tunnel. If anybody intercepts the traffic, all they'll see is a bunch of encrypted gorp. But notice also that most VPNs these days are what are called split tail, which means even if I have my VPN up and I'm using secure capabilities on the Trend Micro server, if I decide to open up Facebook or check my Gmail account, that isn't going to use the VPN at all. The other scenario is where you think about, I'm going to buy a private VPN, so I'll use XYZ VPN. And whenever I send anything from my machine, I'll have an encrypted link between my machine and XY VPN server. But what happens on the other side? It still has to get to the ultimate host. So XYZ VPN is now going to send it over the plain internet in clear text to wherever its ultimate destination is. So you're protecting the left half of your body from the rainstorm with a VPN. Okay, Gmail is not going to put some third-party VPN on their front end so that you can securely talk with them. What they will do, and what most organizations do instead of using VPN, is they'll set up a secure link, SSL link, HTTPS link, so that that traffic is encrypted end to end, which basically means from my keyboard to the server that interprets it. But beyond that, that information is still stored in the clear. So yeah, VPNs can help if that's a problem, but the downside is if I have that encrypted link up from my laptop, to the Trend microserver, and I get a piece of malware on my machine that escapes my detection, I can forward it to somebody accidentally within Trend, and they'll receive a secure message over the VPN from a known user, and the attachment still has an ASCII-gram in it. So VPN is going to help with part of the problem. But the biggest problem we have right now isn't people intercepting internet traffic and snooping on it. The problem is people convincing you and me to open attachments, to click on links, to visit unsafe websites, and to propagate, misleading and false information. So yeah. VPNs.
Yeah, what a great response, Bill. Really appreciate that. And couldn't agree more, because obviously we're seeing an uptick in the bad actors trying to get people to click on something that they shouldn't during the COVID era, right? Help with this or give to this organization. So really appreciate that answer. I think we got time for one or two more here, gentlemen. Great question here. I think very appropriate, at least for the folks who find themselves in the Washington, D.C. area and perhaps around the country here. What kind of security would you suggest for a small government contractor who procures supply contracts for federal, state entities?
Oh, they have to follow the federal government guidelines on procurement. Would be NIST 853, 863, and FSMA, I believe, are the dominant regulations. But yeah, if you're a small contractor, you need to adhere to those. That's not optional.
Robbie, anything you can report to us from the European community on this question?
No, that's not something I'm fully aware of or deal with, so I can't really suggest anything on that one.
All right, thank you. I tell you what, gentlemen, got time for one more here. We can quickly get it in. You've touched on this a bit, but give it to you, Robbie. Maybe we can start with you. What do you think about social engineering as a form of security attack in cyberspace? I think that's a great one to end with, because you two have probably forgotten more than any of us will ever know on this subject. But give us a really high-level thoughts on that. What you think about social engineering as a form of security attack in cyberspace?
I think I've already mentioned that with our Phish Insight, that simulating the attacks is a great way to test your users or see how susceptible your users are. So as I say, the best defense is a good offense. You can apply that metaphor too as well. There's a whole area within corporate security with these red teams where you have, so this is an actual team who will ethically hack your own company to find any weaknesses or vulnerabilities or any servers that got forgotten about or didn't get patched. And then we have a blue team, which would be defending. So you've got these two teams almost playing like war games. This is more something for a larger corporation, but you can get lots of scans online. So there's various vendors that will do port scans for you or other types of scans on your system. So you can do that. And I guess that's the best thing, really, is if you simulate, or if you see the types of attacks out there and you simulate that, then you're prepared for what could come at you. So you're being very aware of what's happening. And I find social engineering fascinating, and it's always interesting to see what email lures are coming up. Again, there was a lot of ones around COVID with vaccines and other types of things. So the attackers are keeping abreast of what's happening in the news and in the media and socially, and they're using those triggers and those keys to try and trick you into doing something that you really shouldn't.
Yeah. Bill, any final thoughts on this?
Well, just that, social engineering is the easiest thing. Rather than try to hack, AES, if you can con or bribe an individual at a bank or at a high-tech company into letting you have access to things, then you've just solved your problem with a lot less expense. So yeah, for the people who have positions like that, heads up, double check something. When you get an email or a message saying, I really need to have access to this right now, doesn't cost a thing to send a phone call their way and say, is this really you? That's a significant attack vector, and it can be shut down.
Bill, Bobby, I cannot thank you enough. This has been a really great presentation. Again, you made it sort of bite-sized for us to be able to understand it a lot better. And for those, we got so many more questions. We're going to try to answer as many as we can offline to get back with you. But if you have more questions about anything that Bill or Robbie talked about, please visit the Trend Micro website. And certainly you can visit our website as well, StaySafeOnline.org at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Again, thank you so very much for joining us. I want to thank again our signature sponsor, Trend Micro. What a great partner. Our affiliate sponsor, Generali, and certainly our strategic partner, ITSP Magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Have a great day. Be safe.